it was partly created by that crisis, because I really did think at the time, well, I've got a few years left, so I'm going to write down the best argument I can for our equality, and maybe after I'm gone, this will survive.
Yeah.
And it's so the actual book, my book Virtually Normal, has a inscription dated the date of my diagnosis to remind myself of how the clarity of the case for marriage equality and dignity for gay people sprung out of the fervor of it, sprung out of the experience of watching how people were treated.
Yeah.
That there were times when the appalling nature of how someone would have lived with someone and cared for them and watched them die and helped them die and then be shut out immediately from the hospital bed, were thrown out of the apartment, not allowed even to the memorial service. This stuff, when you observed that piled onto top of this, was incredibly radicalizing in terms of, I don't care. People need to be treated as humans, and their loves must be respected, and this disease is like any other disease, and stop this. And I think a lot of what amazing energy came out of the gay rights movement in the late 90s and 2000s was sprung from that. Those of us who had lived through it were absolutely adamant it would not happen to anyone again, because it was just so awful.
And hearing you talk about that, my mother was so ardently in favor of abortion. She'd been a nurse, and in the 50s, she had cared for girls. Girls who they were dying sepsis from bad abortions. Mother couldn't come, wouldn't come. They were interviewed by cops, and just they died in extremely terrible ways because sepsis was hard. Really couldn't control then. And it was just, and this idea again that and I know there's birth control, it's a different thing, but the idea that they had done some terrible thing and they had made some terrible mistake. And that's how I ended up being pro-abortion. I just thought, I don't want to lose the mother too. And
and that's, I
but
thought,
my faith, my parents were, I grew up in Berkeley. They were kind of from that New York intellectual set of the 50s. And, oh, God is ridiculous. And that it was also tied to my mother, when her mother suddenly died, all these Baptists telling her that God needed her mother more than she did. And she just decided at 8 years old, well, fuck him,
Absolutely.
Exactly. And the ultimate story, this is really this explains my family's faith. This will bring it all together, Andrew. My father, we were living in Berkeley. My big sister, I probably wasn't born yet. She was 5. She was down outside playing with the girl across the street. And the girl across the street's father, my father would call him Reverend Mum. He was like some minister. And he really was like this old school Berkeley guy. There were people in Berkeley still from the 50s who had been the conservatives, because Berkeley radicalized like overnight with this expansion of the university. So my father and he would wear, the Reverend Mum would wear like the black suit and whatever. So anyways, my sister runs up to my father who's writing and she says, Daddy, Margaret Mum told me there's no Santa Claus. And my dad paused for a moment and he said, you tell Margaret Mum there's no God. And my sister, she had no idea what she was saying. She just thought that, she followed rules. And my father thought, I'm going to pay for this. And sure enough, it was Berkeley. So they had a long stone staircase from their side of the street to mine. Reverend Mum, suited up, coming down, knocks on the door.
Wow.
And he's from the world that, if a minister comes, you let them in and you make tea. But my father had less than respect. And the famous moment was Reverend Mum said, so, my dad's like, so what do you want? Like, there's no small talk. And Reverend Mum said, well, your daughter told my daughter there's no God. And my father said, and your daughter told my daughter there's no Santa Claus. And Reverend Mum, I guess he just exploded because he said, but there is no Santa Claus. And my dad said, and there is no God. So it was just like why it's the ultimate Flanagan story is we didn't have any God, but with Santa and the Easter Bunny, we children had to believe in these goddamn things, and any crisis of faith, they didn't wanna hear about it. You know, you could be 16, "What do you want from Santa?" "Oh, I hope Santa brings me this or that," you know? You just had to fake it.